Dana White sure knows how to hype up a fight, but let's be real. He's also got a fiery side that sometimes clashes with his fighters. Even the champions aren't safe from his unpredictable mood swings. While Dana's usually supportive of his champions, there have been moments when the UFC had a title holder that just didn't click with the president. So stay with us in this video as we go through UFC fighters Dana White never wanted as champion. Athletes in any sport typically take breaks at some point. So when Georges St-Pierre returned to the UFC in 2017, fans were pretty excited. He had been away from the fight scene after his intense split decision victory against Johnny Hendricks at UFC 167 on November 16, 2013. But here's the thing. His departure in 2013 is exactly what ticked off Dana White. But before we dive into that, let's rewind a bit and get a quick backstory on Georges St-Pierre. St-Pierre started his UFC journey at UFC 46 and went on to become a three-time former UFC welterweight champion, winning the title twice and the interim title once between November 2006 and April 2008. He held the spot as the #1 welterweight globally for years. He also won the Canadian Athlete of the Year title from Rogers Sportsnet in 2008, 2009, and 2010. He's even been regarded as the ultimate MMA welterweight and the most accomplished fighter in MMA history, so it was pretty shocking when he decided to walk away from MMA in 2013. Before then, he was the reigning welterweight champion in December 2013, boasting the record for most wins in title bouts and the second longest combined title streak in UFC history, with 2,204 days, defending his title 9 times straight. However, things took a turn while defending his title for the 11th time at UFC 167 against top contender Johnny Hendricks. Or better still, after the match. Right after the win, Dana White wanted St-Pierre to have a rematch against Hendricks, but St-Pierre was determined to take some time away to deal with his physical and mental health. St-Pierre said that he had made his decision before the fight with Hendricks, and the match definitely didn't help his decision. At the end of his bout with Johnny Hendricks, Georges St-Pierre wasn't all there. He literally looked like he'd gone a few rounds with a brick wall. Plus, he was displaying worrying signs of the damage he'd taken. He was so out of it that at one point, he didn't even know what round it was. But even though he won the fight through a bit of controversy, after the fight, the troubled welterweight mentioned something pretty serious. He was worried about possible brain damage, confessing he even lost track of time in the cage that night. He was struggling to articulate his thoughts and even apologized to announcer Joe Rogan at one point, showing the strain of the moment on the champion. In a move that would have shocked the MMA world if his support team hadn't hinted at it all week, St-Pierre made the call to step away from the sport. "There's a lot happening in my life," St-Pierre revealed in the cage right after the fight. "I need to take a step back. Right now, I need to take some time off." To say UFC promoter Dana White didn't handle this news well would be a massive understatement. White was livid, taking out his anger on the Nevada State Athletic Commission, reporters who scored the fight for St-Pierre, and even St-Pierre himself. White had only one thing on his mind: getting his champion back in the cage. Did he say he wants to retire? He didn't say, "I'm retiring, I'm hanging it up. It's been great, everyone. Thanks for the years. See you later," a furious White exclaimed after the fight. He said, "I'm taking some time off." No, you don't just say, "I'll take some time off, maybe I'll be back, maybe I won't." You owe it to the fans. You owe it to that belt. You owe it to this company. And you owe it to Johnny Hendricks to give him the opportunity to fight again. To his credit, St-Pierre faced the press and White after the bout. Though he wouldn't reveal what was causing him so much emotional pain, he did give a rundown on the toll the fight had taken on his body and mind. Right after the press conference, White and UFC owner Lorenzo Fertitta cornered St-Pierre, trying to talk him into getting back into the cage. In the fight game, fighters often get treated like just another product by promoters. But for White, St-Pierre was the ultimate cash cow, making him super valuable for the UFC. Now, you'd think a decent human being would be worried about St-Pierre's well-being, especially after a fight that clearly left him dazed and confused. But it seemed like that wasn't even on White's radar. At the press conference, nobody, except St-Pierre himself, seemed to give a darn about the toll that brutal beatdown might have taken on him, both physically and emotionally. The big question everyone had was, how fast could they convince the reluctant champ to step back into the cage? "Don't worry, his problems aren't as bad as he thinks," White reassured the press after talking with St. Pierre. "They're more personal stuff. It might seem like the end of the world to him, but trust me, it's not." It looked like whether it was the right call or not that White had persuaded St. Pierre to stage a comeback, but it didn't happen right away. St. Pierre took off for 3 years and didn't return. St. Pierre hinted at a comeback once he got his health in check, eyeing possible showdowns in the lightweight division against heavy hitters like Khabib Nurmagomedov or Conor McGregor. But White didn't seem interested in the idea. He did return to the Octagon finally in November 2017 at UFC 217, where he nailed a submission win over Michael Bisping to grab the middleweight title, making him only the 4th fighter ever in UFC history to hold belts in multiple divisions. However, he didn't stay for too long, probably because of Dana White. Despite St. Pierre's itch to get back in the game, his UFC contract kept him locked in, ruling out any boxing ventures or hopping to another MMA outfit. With little action and lingering UFC troubles, St. Pierre eventually decided to call it quits on his career. Moving on, Tim Sylvia is another UFC champ whose career hit a rough patch after his run-in with Dana White. Tim Sylvia, the ex-UFC heavyweight champ, was like a towering titan in the ring. Hailing from Maine, this dude was a total nightmare to face with his massive size and killer intensity, making him stand outdoors big time in the heavyweight scene. He's been in the game as both a super heavyweight and heavyweight, throwing down not just in the UFC, but also repping in Affliction, IFC, and ONE FC. Sylvia kicked off his pro MMA journey back in 2001 with IFC, but his rise was just getting started. He dominated the scene, notching up 13 straight wins, with 10 of them being brutal knockouts. Making waves in organizations like Hawaii-based Super Brawl and Extreme Challenge, he was on fire. Then in 2002, he joined the UFC and wasted no time making an impact. He scored a TKO win against Wesley "Cabbage" Carrera at UFC 39, thanks to Carrera's corner throwing in the towel. Following that up, he won the UFC heavyweight title by taking down Rico Rodriguez at UFC 41. And he didn't stop there. He defended his belt, scoring another quick win over Gan McGee at UFC 44. The man was unstoppable. However, his reign as UFC heavyweight champion could hardly have begun in worse fashion. Just when things were heating up after winning the title from Rico Rodriguez and showing Gan McGee who's boss, he got hit with a positive test for anabolic steroids by the Nevada State Athletic Commission. This led to him getting the belt snatched right out of his hands, and probably the start of Dana White's grudge against him. Even though Tim Sylvia had a bit of a hiccup with steroids, the UFC didn't fully kick him to the curb. After serving a 6-month suspension, he jumped back into the Octagon in 2004 against Frank Mir for the heavyweight crown. But things took a turn when he snatched the title from Andrei Arlovski in 2006. Suddenly, his cozy relationship with the UFC took a nosedive faster than a heavyweight's jab. Sure, he won the title with an epic knockout, but his first 2 title defenses against Arlovski in a rematch, and then against Jeff Monson, were snooze fests that left UFC fans fuming. Dana White must have breathed a sigh of relief when Randy Couture took the title from Sylvia in early 2007. Sylvia didn't endear himself any further when he wanted to fight against Brock Lesnar, the ex-WWE star, upon his arrival in the UFC in 2008. Sylvia's request was turned down, and when he demanded his release from the UFC, he was quickly granted it. He then took his talents to the Affliction scene, but unlike some other fighters who bounced between promotions, he never found his way back to the UFC Octagon. According to Sylvia himself, the reason behind this was none other than Dana White holding a grudge against him. When whispers of a UFC comeback floated around, Dana White was practically losing his mind with disbelief. "Are you kidding me? He seriously wants to return to the UFC? He hasn't won a fight in years, and when he did, he usually put everyone to sleep. The only time he's in an exciting fight is when he's getting his ass handed to him," White said of his former champion. "Look, he just got beat by a near 50-year-old in under 10 seconds. How do you expect to be taken seriously after that? He just made MMA look like a complete joke. If he has any hopes of ending his career in the UFC, he will have to go on The Ultimate Fighter. There's no other way he's getting in. We've seen Dana White give the boot to former champions in the past, but he's usually not this open about his feelings towards someone who once ruled their division in the UFC. It's tricky to pinpoint, but there was probably more to it. But you see, everyone knows why Dana White had a bone to pick with Chris Cyborg. Chris Cyborg is a legend in the MMA world, being the sole fighter to achieve Grand Slam champion status, snatching up world titles in 4 major MMA promotions. She's hailed as one of the absolute best female fighters to ever step into the cage. Before adopting the iconic nickname Cyborg, she kicked off her pro MMA journey at the ripe age of 19 in 2005 at Showfight 2. After taking a hit in her MMA debut, Cyborg bounced back strongly, securing her first win in the sport by outclassing Vanessa Porto with a unanimous decision. From there, she went on a tear, scoring 3 consecutive victories in the Brazilian promotion Storm Samurai, all by first-round TKO finishes. With those wins under her belt, her record climbed to an impressive 4-1.1. In her highly anticipated United States MMA debut on July 26, 2008, at Elite XAC Unfinished Business, Cyborg faced off against Shayna Baszler. Her ascent to fame began when she won the Strikeforce title on August 15, 2009, with a jaw-dropping first-round TKO victory over Gina Carano. For the longest time, it seemed like Chris Cyborg was destined to stay on the sidelines, looking in at the UFC from the outside. Even when the UFC obtained Strikeforce in 2011 and started adding its fighters to the roster in 2013, Cyborg was left out despite reigning as the featherweight champ in that promotion. No official reason was given, but it was clear that Dana White wasn't a fan of the Brazilian, even calling her Wanderlei Silva in a dress in one notorious interview. By 2016, the UFC seemed to have a change of heart, realizing that Cyborg's skills in the cage outweighed any supposed difficulties in working with her. They gave her a shot with 2 bouts at a 140-pound catchweight. When it became evident that hitting 135 pounds was just not in the cards for her, the UFC made a bold move and introduced a 145-pound division, mainly tailored to fit Cyborg's weight class. But here's where things really hit the fan between her and White. Trouble started brewing when Cyborg admitted she couldn't hit the mark for the UFC's inaugural title fight in her weight class. Opting instead for a fight between Holly Holm and Germaine de Randamie, it seemed like Cyborg was back to square one with the promotion, facing the possibility of being sidelined once more. When de Randamie backed out of fighting Cyborg, the UFC wasn't having it. They rescinded her title and set up a match between Cyborg and Evinger instead. Cyborg nailed it, grabbing the title and skyrocketing to UFC stardom. Despite coming to the rescue for UFC 222 in 2018, offering to headline the event on short notice, Cyborg never quite got Dana White's full support. When she lost her title to Amanda Nunes, things soured quickly. Cyborg kept pushing for a rematch but couldn't strike a deal with the UFC. White repeatedly claimed that Cyborg wasn't genuinely interested in facing Nunes again. Cyborg had one more fight in the UFC, scoring a win against Felicia Spencer before both parties decided to part ways amicably. White made it clear he was done dealing with Cyborg, stating he was out of the Cyborg business, and he appeared quite relieved about it. Just like Chris Cyborg, Dana's issue with Demetrius Johnson had to do with his weight division. It's easy to forget that Johnson started his UFC journey in the bantamweight scene and took a shot at Dominic Cruz's title back in 2011. Even though he was quicker than Cruz, who was in his prime at the time, Johnson just couldn't match up to Cruz's size and strength, getting out-muscled in the end. Demetrius Johnson was the first ever 125-pound UFC flyweight champ. Renowned for his lightning-fast strikes and slick footwork, Johnson shares the record for the latest UFC finish, snagging a submission victory at 4:59 of the 5th round against Kyoji Horiguchi. Plus, he's got the most finishes in UFC flyweight history, tallying up to 7. Johnson is widely known as one of the greatest MMA fighters ever, with many considering him the absolute best in the sport's history. His journey into MMA started as a mere hobby, but it quickly turned into something more serious when he joined AMC Pankration. There, he crossed paths with MMA pioneer Matt Hume, who had been keeping an eye on Johnson and arranged his debut in the sport. Johnson started his MMA career as an amateur in 2006, scoring a first-round knockout victory. From there, he went on a winning streak, triumphing in his next 8 fights, with 5 of them ending in submission victories. Demetrius Johnson has earned the title of the world's best pound-for-pound fighter, a sentiment shared by many, including Dana White. Despite their past issues, Johnson seems to have patched things up with the UFC president, for now at least. However, with Dana's unpredictable nature, who knows how long that will last? Johnson's rift with the UFC arose when they pushed for a super fight against former bantamweight champion TJ Dillashaw, requiring Dillashaw to drop to 125 pounds to challenge him. Johnson, being the consummate professional, made the move down to flyweight and etched his name as the greatest in UFC flyweight history. With his dominance clear in the flyweight division, fans wanted Johnson to step up in weight once more, eyeing matchups against the likes of Cruz, TJ Dillashaw, and Cody Garbrandt. However, in 2017, tensions between White and Johnson escalated as the UFC reportedly struggled to promote him effectively despite his undeniable dominance. Back in 2017, Dillashaw was all hyped up to jump into the flyweight scene and take on Johnson for the title if he couldn't throw down with Garbrandt at UFC 217. But Johnson wasn't feeling it. He didn't think Dillashaw deserved a shot at the title, which got Dana White all riled up. Johnson even doubted Dillashaw could make the weight and said he'd rather throw down with Ray Borg, who, let's be real, wasn't as much of a household name as Dillashaw. In a social media rant, Johnson revealed Dana and the UFC's reaction to his decision. They reportedly tried to shortchange his pay, strong-arm him into facing Dillashaw, and even threw around the crazy idea of cutting the entire flyweight division. Luckily, things simmered down, and Johnson went on to gain another win against Borg. But with Dillashaw now rocking the bantamweight belt and itching for that super fight with Johnson, this drama might just rear its head again sooner than we think. Next up, not only did Dana White not want Tyron Woodley to be champ, but he even dubbed him the most difficult fighter he's ever worked with. As a former UFC welterweight champion, he defended his title 4 times over. But hey, before his UFC glory days, Woodley was tearing it up in Strikeforce and even representing the Missouri Tigers as a top-notch wrestler. Back in 2009, Woodley started his pro journey by schooling Steve Schneider with a slick submission. Then came the moment we'll never forget, UFC 201, where he straight up knocked out Robbie Lawler to win that welterweight crown, netting him the Performance of the Night award. But hey, even legends have their off days, and Woodley met his match in Kamaru Usman at UFC 235. It was a tough pill to swallow, ending his epic reign as welterweight champion. When Tyron Woodley scored that epic knockout against Robbie Lawler to win the UFC welterweight title in 2016, it was like watching a superhero rise. Everyone thought the chosen one was destined for superstardom, but somehow he never quite soared to the sky-high expectations everyone had set for him. Part of the reason for this might just be his rocky relationship with Dana White. Woodley didn't shy away from calling out the UFC for what he saw as unfair treatment in the promotion department. It left White confused, even going as far as calling Woodley the most difficult fighter he's ever dealt with. White tried to things up by saying he didn't harbor any real dislike for Woodley, but let's face it, sometimes it sure seemed that way. Just take a look at how visibly annoyed he was during Woodley's title defenses against Stephen Thompson and Demian Maia. After the Maia fight, White doesn't hold back, slamming the chosen one, and straight up saying nobody will pay any money to watch him fight again. And as for a dream matchup with Georges St-Pierre, White made it crystal clear that wasn't happening anytime soon. You've probably heard of Randy Couture, who hasn't. This guy stands as a unique figure in UFC history, holding both heavyweight and light heavyweight belts. But man, did he stir up some trouble. Dana White's beef with Tito Ortiz was a thing, but Couture took the cake for ticking off the executives at the UFC. He managed to land himself on the UFC's blacklist not once, but twice. Back in the day, Couture was like the golden boy of the UFC scene. When Dana White stepped up as president in 2001, Couture was already holding down the fort as the heavyweight champ, getting plenty of spotlight as one of the UFC's top dogs. Then, in 2003, he made history by winning the light heavyweight title, becoming the first to hold 2 UFC belts in different weight classes. And who could forget his stint coaching alongside Chuck Liddell on the inaugural season of The Ultimate Fighter in 2005? Couture was everywhere, making waves and cementing his status as a true legend. But then, things took a turn when Couture won the UFC heavyweight title for the 3rd time in 2007. He had his sights set on a showdown with former Pride champ Fedor Emelianenko, itching for the UFC to make it happen. But this didn't happen. Couture dropped a bombshell. He was out of there, saying goodbye to the UFC. While White didn't go all out publicly bashing Couture, it was obvious he was angry. He practically banished Couture from the UFC until Couture finally caved and made his way back in 2008. It seemed like White was ready to bury the hatchet, giving Couture another shot in the limelight as one of the UFC's top stars. But just when everyone thought the dust had settled, Couture pulled a fast one. After hanging up his gloves in 2011, he blindsided everyone by ditching his broadcasting gig with the UFC to jump ship to their rival, Bellator MMA. White couldn't contain his fury anymore, and it all came pouring out. He laid bare his true feelings on Couture, straight up saying he had zero respect for him. White didn't mince words, declaring, "The only time that Randy Couture is a man is when he sets foot in the cage." In one of his angriest interviews yet, White didn't hold back, showcasing just how toxic his relationship with the legendary Couture had become. And coming from a guy known for his fiery temperament, that spoke volumes about the level of animosity between them. So there you have it. UFC fighters Dana White never wanted as champion. What do you think? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section. And before you leave, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Octagon Rivals so you don't miss the next ones.